Pregame.com.
I'm Vegas Runner, here with Scott Sprites. Are going to break down Friday's Sweet 16 matchup. Number 10 seeded Xavier playing the 3 seed Baylor. Big game in this one. They made the line 6. That's correct. A 3 seed versus a 10, but the line opened 6 and 140, still 6 and 140. Who do you like?
Well, I'll tell you what, getting to the meat of this one, I can remember back in December, and a lot of people, I think, don't remember that are just tuning in for March Madness around the country. This Musketeers team was 8th in the nation when they went, and they were undefeated going to that game against Cincinnati. After the basket brawl, as we call it,
yeah.
All the suspensions, they won that game, but then they fell apart. And it seemed like they got off kilter. And it's funny, I've had a pretty good basketball season, college, but I'm watching this team throughout the months, January, February, and I kept thinking I was one step ahead of the lines maker, and I'd go out and I'd back Xavier at a certain time, and they cost me. You know, I probably went 1-4 with Xavier in the regular season, all games coming after that Cincinnati suspension, because I remembered how good this team was.
And they did. They only went 13 and 18 against the spread,
exactly.
So not a team that made anyone
no,
money
they
back.
didn't. And what they did, VR, was, you know, the last 9 games of the regular season, they alternated wins and losses. They went 5-4 straight up in those final 9 games. So I started thinking maybe this is a team that's going to see that talent go untapped or not reach their potential. But here they are. They've made it to the Sweet 16. They've got it rolling.
As a 10 seed, I'll tell you what, everyone knows that as far as me and Baylor, we don't have too good of a history, okay? So I'm a little bit biased, but I'm going to tell you the honest truth. I like Xavier in this game, and I really think this is a winnable game for them for one reason only. This is the one team that Baylor will not match up well against because they won't be able to dominate them as far as size goes. You know, if Baylor gets a team that they're so much taller than, then they just look so confident. But when they don't have that size advantage, that's when I've seen weakness. Now, they bounced back extremely well after losing to Missouri in that Big 12 championship. I mean, they got blown out at the end by 15. It was closer. They made some runs, but they just showed that they're not an experienced team. And Missouri, who didn't have size, was able to get it done. But Baylor bounced back 2 nice wins and covers in this big dance. But here's what I don't like about this team. When you have that much size, you shouldn't have 28% of your points come from the three-point line. And what happens is this. You've now had 3 days off, 4 days off, whatever it is. And they shot 55% from the three-point line against Colorado, 40% against South Dakota State. If anything, the worst possible scenario for a team that's shooting lights out like that and depends on the three is a break.
Sure.
And that's exactly what they got now. And I think if they don't hit from the outside, they're going to find it difficult to go inside because Xavier has that size to match up with them. And this is probably one of the best 10 seeds I've seen in a while, and you hit it right on the head. This team was ranked top 10 in the country. And when you look, they have all the makings of a team that deserves to be there. They're one of the most experienced teams. They had one of the toughest strength of schedules, and they managed to go 23-12 even after that fiasco in Cincinnati. So even though they weren't a team that made you money backing them throughout the season, maybe a little overvalued, I think right now they're undervalued. They go 10 deep at times, and I just think they're going to be too much for Baylor.
The one thing that bothers me about Xavier, and we're going to be opposite on our leans here on this one, don't know if Baylor is going to make my final card. We're going to wait and see. We're doing this
it's still early.
Tuesday,
Sure,
and I want to see what
sure.
what happens with this lineup.
Sure.
But when you look at like Holloway, one of my favorite guards in all of college basketball, for Xavier, of course, hasn't quite got the consistent help from Mark Lyons. That bothers me a little bit. You know, Holloway had 25 against Notre Dame. Had Xavier, by the way, here at pregame against Notre Dame. They had a nice comeback and won that contest. He scores 25. Kenny Freese goes nuts against Lehigh. And I got to admit, that final margin of victory, I didn't have action on the game, but that final margin of victory, Xavier running away with that in the second half, surprised me because Lehigh was not a fluke. It's a very good basketball team.
Oh, and they
Freese
tested them early.
Oh, they did.
I mean, I was thinking Cinderella.
Same here, yeah. And then Freese went nuts and scores 25 points, the big kid. But here's the problem with that is Freese is a guy who averages less than 10 points per game. The matchup that I'm looking forward to in this one is Perry Miller going inside against Freese, a couple of bigs. Freese is a guy who plays consistently on the defensive end, night in, night out. Had that bust-out game offensively. They don't have to count on Freese usually to score a lot of points to win basketball games. Perry Jones, I'm sorry, Perry Jones, he bothers me a little bit because I've had this kid rated a lot higher going into this season, and in the non-conference year, he's kind of an enigma. I mean, this guy, it's like one night he looks like a lottery pick, and the next night he looks like he probably should be about 8 deep on a major college basketball team.
It's the sophomore, man. They're still young.
Yeah, he's young, and so that's the thing. And then you got, Quincy Miller, he's young. So you've got some youth on this Baylor team. The one thing that scares me, and here I am leaning towards Baylor, the one thing that scares me about the way they approach the Colorado game, I'm watching the Buffaloes against UNLV in the opening round, and when UNLV started to pick up the Colorado guards in the backcourt, changed the whole complex of the game, and UNLV was able to get back in and almost win the contest. And I remember writing on the forum here at pregame that night after the UNLV game is how disruptive that picking them up in the backcourt, Colorado's guards, became towards the Buffalo's chances. And I said, guess what Drew's going to do with Baylor? They didn't do it the first half. I was really shocked that this coach just saw the blueprint and waited till the second half to get it going. And Heslop, of course, picked it up from area code 3, and that's when Baylor made that huge run in the final 6 or 7 minutes. Obviously, the final score not indicative of how close that game was between Baylor and Colorado for most of the contest. But again, I got to stick with what I said a couple of weeks ago. Marco and I were doing a Baylor Bears game. I forget who they were playing. It was right before the Big 12 conference tournament. And I had stated that I thought Baylor was going to be better fit for the big dance than for the Big 12 tournament because even though Xavier is big, they don't see, just like Baylor, they don't see a lot of guys who are also big coming at them and with the athletic talent and gifted athleticism that the Baylor Bears possess. But it all comes down really to, will Perry Jones, the lottery pick Perry Jones, show up, or will it be the guy who should be 8th on the bench show up in this game? I'm going to bet right now, at least right now as I lean towards this game, I'm gonna go with the Baylor Bears. Still waiting to see kind of what happens with this line before I jump in and make it part of my final card. For now, I'm going to say the Baylor Bears, though.
All right, so you got Scott liking Baylor. Again, I'm a little biased, but truth of the matter is I just think Xavier has upset written on them. They just look like that team that's capable of showing up and upsetting anyone because of that experience. So I'm going to have to lean the other way and say grab the points with Baylor, but he's been on a roll when it comes to the big dance, so he's been on fire, I'll tell you that. I've been cold. I mean, good last day, but the first 3 days were just horrific, so may want to lean to the Baylor side before you walk over to be our Xavier side.
I'm just hoping that that 3-day layoff
doesn't cool you off like the Baylor three-point shot. I don't think so. You're talking about sophomores and freshmen.
That's true.
Not a senior point guard. So we're going to be back. We got an NBA game Friday night, ESPN. Big Atlantic Conference game, Sixers, Celtics, fighting for that top spot in the Atlantic. We're going to be back to cover that game. Don't forget pregamevideos.com. All our videos, notes, conversations. Tell us who's right, tell us who's wrong. Let us know who you like.